It's a great opportunity to talk about chinuch, talk about education. This class is dedicated to Emma Kirschblum, and unfortunately, we did not have a kiddush live in person, but Sroli and Ricky had a baby, and we didn't have a chance to have a kiddush in person, so we wanted to dedicate this to Emma, and it's exciting to be able to celebrate a new chapter, to become new parents for the first time. So a really big mazel tov to Srili and Ricky, and I want to thank them for letting me do this. Certainly wanted to celebrate their daughter, and this is a way of doing it. And we scheduled it around Srili's academic schedule, and we wish him best of luck with that. And Hanukkah is also just a great time to talk about education. The word Hanukkah is related to the Hebrew word chinuch in a certain sense, that they have similar words there. And just like chinuch, or education, is the foundation of a person's life and is so critical for who they are. So the Chanukah is Chanukah Sabayis. It's the foundation it's an inauguration of the temple. That's what took place in Chanukah and the Mizbeach. And my Rebbe, Rabbi Simon, he says that why are we celebrating the fact that the oil, that they had pure oil? The truth is, in such extenuating circumstances, the law would have it that you could have impure oil and have tameh oil. And he explains that because when you're starting something fresh, when you're starting something new, you want the ingredients to be the purest form. You want to get off on the right start. So they wanted to make sure that they had pure oil. And the same thing is true with the foundations for life. And when it comes to childhood and to children, we want to make sure that they have the best experience possible, as these are the building blocks that lead to them becoming a full and complete person. So in addition, Hanukkah is most appropriate to talk about this topic. Rav Soloveitchik says that Hanukkah, it's a rabbinic mitzvah. So it's a holiday that only exists in oral transmission. It's a holiday that exists because it was passed down from generation to generation, primarily from parent to child. So if we're ever going to talk about passing down our Masorah, passing down our tradition, so Hanukkah, in addition to Purim, but Hanukkah is the holiday to accomplish that. And especially Hanukkah, because how do you pass down the tradition of Hanukkah? By people seeing the candles. So our children watch us, and just like we educate the world, so to speak, by people watching the candles. Education happens most, not really through osmosis, but through witnessing what the parent is up to. So this is just all by way of introduction. And I'll just end the introduction here with a story. This story comes from the great psychologist, Dr. Pelkovitz, who says that there was once a boy who was being told by his parents over and over and over again, to the extent where it was really impacting their relationship, that he should go ahead and he should wear tzitzis. And he never wore tzitzis under his garment. He was always obstinate when it came to that. And then that boy grew up and became a parent. And when he was parenting his child one day, his child came running home from school and said, "Guess what I learned? I learned about tzitzis. Can you show me your tzitzis?" He wasn't wearing any tzitzis, and he called up his parents and he said to his parents, "Now I understand why you wanted me to wear tzitzis." So that's just one story of many where children try to mirror their parents. And I now want to that's the end of the introduction. This class will have two sections. I guess just as a point of emphasis here, I'm giving a class on parenting, not because I think I'm an expert on parenting at all, not in the slightest. It is extremely, extremely challenging, but I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity here that Shirley and Ricky presented to us, that we could all focus on the wisdom of the Torah to see how we could become better at navigating the very difficult waters that is 21st century American Judaism. So there's going to be two parts here. The first part is going to talk about an overall kind of general approach to parenting. And the second part is going to have some very specific examples of parenting techniques. Again, it's not because I'm an expert, but it's because I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity that we could all focus on some of the wisdom that I think the Torah has to offer for advice here. So I want to start off actually talking about the pandemic. And the pandemic has been very challenging, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. And the light at the end of the tunnel is a vaccine. And first of all, it should be of no surprise that anybody who's eligible and who can get their hands on the vaccine and take the vaccine, strongly encouraged to do so with medical experts' guidance. And the reason why I mention that is because how does the vaccine work? As we know, what has become famous throughout the world is the image of the virus itself. It seems to have many different prongs to it. It seems to be circular or has some, I don't know how to describe it, but tentacles sticking out of it. And this virus can make its way into the bloodstream, and it can wreak a lot of havoc and cause lots of damage. And what the vaccine does is, and I reviewed this with the doctor earlier today, but I think it's quite appropriate to talk about here. What the vaccine does is that it covers these balls with a film, if you will, and so that it doesn't have such a strong impact on the bloodstream, and it kind of blankets it so that it kind of mitigates the impact that it could have. The reason why I share this is by way of introduction to this first section, to part one. And I strongly believe that all people will attach themselves to some sort of influence. Question is what that influence will be. So the virus can attach itself in ways that is terribly damaging, or you can have a vaccine that can render the virus less harmful. And I think I see my father's on the call, so maybe at the end of the class he can correct all this, all these attempts at biochemistry. But I very much believe the same thing is true with the human psyche. We are going to be influenced by something. The question is, what is going to influence us? Nobody exists in a vacuum. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to be here and there won't be any influences. So how do we make sure that we do the best we can with the influence of Greek culture, the influence of secularism, and to a great extent, for the purposes of this class, view them as synonymous. We have to get real with ourselves. We can't just detach from secular culture and say we hope secular culture doesn't have an impact, or secularism doesn't have an impact. We'll talk about the full extent of that in a little bit, because you need to attach yourself to something, because by attaching yourself to something, that is going to impact who you are and how you are, and it would be foolish and foolhardy. And this is lesson number one, I think, from the Torah, that we need to fill up the extent of what influences us, and that is the best way in terms of dealing with secular culture. So where does this come from? I'm going to share my screen. Hold on a second over here. I will do this in just a moment. All right, here we go. I'm going to share my screen. Say goodbye to Washington State. Okay. All right. You look in Devarim. Devarim is one of the, I just read an article by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs about how Devarim is like penultimate Torah text to learn in so many ways. And anyways, beginning of chapter 4, verse 4, about Vekim, so you should make sure you have dvekus, you have closeness to Hashem, and it's going to lead you towards having this great life. Okay, sounds very nice, but the Torah has a lot of issues with this concept. What is dvekus? What is, and the reason why I say clinging, the reason I want to put that image in our minds is physically, it matters at what this strain of coronavirus, COVID-19, it matters what that attaches to. It's existential. And spiritually, psychologically, it matters what we connect our attention to in terms of influences. So I think it's really ineffective. Torah is going to tell us to just detach without having anything to replace it, because we're going to attach to something no matter what. So, Rashi tells us, and Chazal is really bothered by this, and I really like to review these sources from a chinuch perspective as you raise a child, to really think about this. It says, and the Gemara is bothered by this. God is an all-consuming kind of fire that you can't come close to God. It's so close to God in the sense that, I guess the prime example being, we were all at the revelation at Har Sinai, and we'd said to Moshe, stop, it's too much, we can't handle it anymore, because the closeness that we had to the Almighty was so frightening for us. And so Chazal say, you know what it means? It means attaching yourself to the Torah, but literally clinging to the Torah. How do you cling to the Torah? It says to marry a scholar, marry the child of a scholar. And that's what Rashi tells us here. And we were told elsewhere to follow in Hashem's path. How do you follow in Hashem's path? And what I guess what we're trying to define now is, okay, we've established you need to cling to the right influence. And the right influence is making sure that we're connecting to Torah. And the way to deal with secular culture is to make sure we're not bored, to make sure we're influenced by something more positive. So number one is to cling to God. You can't cling to God, so what are you supposed to do? Cling to scholars. It talks about marrying off your child to scholars, etc. And that's how you cling to God. And beyond that, we say follow in Hashem's footsteps. That's another way of clinging to God. So how do you follow in Hashem's footsteps? So you're supposed to do acts of kindness, just like Hashem is involved in visiting the sick, as we see with Avraham, after Avraham has the circumcision, just as Hashem was involved in burying Sarah. So we should be involved in, comforting Avraham after the bereaved when Sarah passes away, and clothing Adam and Chava, and burying Moshe Rabbeinu. These are acts of chesed that are emblematic, that represent the fact that we too can be godly, and we can do that by doing these acts of chesed, and that's how we, in a sense, cling to God. Again, clinging to God being the replacement of clinging to other influences, which automatically happens. So now we're going to, we'll see that it's not just marriage to scholars, but also socializing with scholars, being involved in commercial activities with scholars. So by clinging to scholars, we cling to scholarship. By clinging to scholarship, we cling to the Almighty. By clinging to the Almighty, we don't have the same level of clinging to other influences. And that's how the Rambam understands the concept of dvekus. So if we get anything from the first part of this class, it's dvekus, clinging to Hashem, is the antidote for clinging to secularism. And you cannot say that I'm not going to cling to secularism unless you're clinging to something else, because clinging is something that always happens as a human being, and people are always influenced no matter what. Now, Okay, here, stop share, and this is what I'm going to show you now is chapter 6 in Hilchos Deos in the Rambam. And the Rambam has a very important comment here about influences. And we're talking about parenting. We're talking about the challenge of raising children in a world that has very significant influences. So I don't know in terms of whether I want to call on people. I think I'll just run with it here. So the Rambam says it is a natural tendency of man to be influenced in his ideas and conduct by his fellows and associates, and to follow the usage of the people of his state. Wherever you live, your society is going to influence you. It's axiomatic. It happens to all of us. That's what the Rambam says. Because it's necessary for man to be in the company, because of this, it's necessary for man to be in the company of the righteous and to sit near the wise people in order to learn from their conduct and to distance himself from evildoers who follow the path of darkness. People want to be social, but we have a choice who we want to be social with. And he quotes Shlomo Melech, who talks about walking with the wise and not the companionship of the fools. And likewise, he says at the very top, if a man be in a state where evil customs prevail, if you're in a place where there's a lot of evil going on, where the people are not following righteous ways, such an individual should go to a place where the inhabitants are righteous and follow the way of the good. If all the states in the world, all the countries known to him, which be followers of the path which is not good, even as it is in our own times, or if he be unable to migrate to a country whose rules of conduct are good. And he gives examples. Sometimes you have societies that are obsessed with warfare. Sometimes they just have lots of sickness. So such an individual should isolate himself and live in seclusion, which is crazy because you and I know from the pandemic that living in seclusion is so challenging and it's so difficult. But the Rambam says that, look, all of us are going to be influenced. And we have a decision. He's taking it to the extreme to show us that we have the free will to decide what influences us. And if there's no place where the influence is good, seclusion might be an option. And the Rambam knows how mentally challenging that is. So if the inhabitants of his state, if they're evildoers and sinners who deny him the right of residence in the state, unless to become assimilated with them, and he follows their evil conduct, it should go forth, should dwell in the cave, dwell in the cliffs, dwell in the desert. But above all, do not accustom yourself in the way of the sinners. In other words, we're influenced by everybody. There's a lot lost in translation here, but it's easier to see it in the English instead of the Hebrew. And this is followed up with exactly our topic at hand, where the Rambam says it's a mandatory commandment to go ahead and have dveikus, to cling and cleave to wisdom through wise people and their students in order to learn from them. And the Rambam even says, is it possible to cling to God? God is not physical. So he explains that that he says, take for a wife the daughter of a wise person and vice versa, and do business with them, eat and drink with wise people, and associate them in every form of companionship possible. So, okay. That's what the Rambam says, and I wanted to share that with you all. And people should understand that psychologically, it's impossible to say, oh, I'm not clinging to anything at all. It's not true. We're always going to cling to something. And for me, and maybe people don't relate to this, but for the virus to cling to something so that it doesn't infect us is a very powerful imagery. And the same is true for us in terms of our personality. And the marriage point here, where he talks about socially being married to wisdom in a sense, it shows you how we can use our intellect to think through the difficulties that present themselves through secular culture. And why are we talking about all this? Because being in the 21st century in a secular society is very, very, very challenging. So if we're not prepared by talking about it with each other like we're doing right now, it's going to be exceedingly difficult. So financially investing in scholarship and in scholars is very important, because part of who we are by definition are our resources. Investing those resources in the right way shows our family, shows our children who we are, how we define ourselves. And that's what I think the Rambam and others are getting at. I wanted to share, we're almost done with the first section here, just another couple minutes. The Meshech Chachma of Meir Simcha of Dvinsk. So,
then I'll come.
Yeah.
Should we just call it a night?
No, I want to. No, we have to order stuff.
I thought you just ordered.
Elliot, you got that? Okay, thanks.
No, I won't. Waiting for you.
Hold on.
Some things.
Yeah. The shower.
All right, there we go. I got it. Okay. So the Meshech Chochmah says, where elsewhere we are told that in Devarim again, where there's so much important a philosophy and worldview, that we should revere Hashem, and chapter 10, verse 20, and only serve Hashem. And this is juxtaposed to the idea that that again, uvot tidbak, that we should cling to Hashem. And the Meshech Chochmah says that this is a mitzvah. One of the 613 is to cling to Hashem, as we've been talking about. And it's very interesting. I didn't notice this till just now, that it juxtaposes worship of Hashem to clinging to Hashem. And this is the commentary now of the Meshech Chochmah. So, 1 second. Let's see if I can pull this up again. Uh-oh. Hold on. Bear with me just a moment. Okay. So the Meshech Chochmah says, in my opinion, this is a separate mitzvah. Every person, it applies to every person in the Jewish people, each according to their ability. For this reason, we only find allusions and hints to it in the Torah. It refers to trust. What is it? He has his own definition, separate from the Rambam. We'll see it's connected, but he says it refers to trust. The concept is that there is moral trust, like the trust of a nation in their king, that the king, that he hasn't just left us, that Hashem is still concerned with us. And by clinging to Hashem in terms of our mind and realizing that we're not distant from Hashem, that Hashem is with us, so that's how we cling to Hashem, not through marriage or through actually marrying scholars or scholarship, etc., but rather by realizing that the Almighty hasn't left us high and dry. And if we convey to the next generation, to our children, to our youth, that the Almighty is still relevant, then that's a major part of how we can accomplish dveikus. And again, dveikus being the way to ensure what influences us, presuming that we all understand that there always is some sort of influence. Okay, so here at the top where my cursor is, a person can sit securely. Person can have peace and tranquility, and when they have this mentality. And this is what it means to cling to the Almighty. When a person understands that he's clinging to the Almighty and he's attached to the higher providence of Hashem, and Hashem is aware of everything that a person does, even more so than the person is aware for himself. After all, Hashem knows all. So this is what we mean by attachment, by training our minds to understand that we're still connected to the Almighty in a very real way. So this will help with person in terms of overcoming any fears, in terms of developing trust. And we should raise our children to be trusting when it comes to the Almighty. And he explains that it's very difficult in modern times, etc., etc. So I believe if we accomplish this and we understand that trust is an expectation of ours, an obligation of ours, so one mitzvah will lead to another mitzvah. We understand from Pirkei Avos that our neighbors, and we can choose who our neighbors are. It's not imposed upon us, but our neighbors will influence us. We should make sure to have shachin tov and not a shachin ra, and we should realize that we are empowered to control the environment that we're in. And I think it's very important to understand, because everything I said so far, I need to add a very important, a really important caveat. We are not saying that secular culture is bad. That's very important. We should never teach our children that the secular culture is bad. It's a matter of what fills up the time and the mental energy of what influences us. And the Medrash tells us that we say, Yesh chachma b'goyim, there is wisdom among the nations of the world. And it's a beautiful idea about how do we look at the world. Yes, it's true, there's a Molech in the world, and there are nations that try to destroy us and that have a terrible influence on us, and they're really weak in terms of their spirituality. But what about our system? The system, our judicial system? What about the system that was set up that Moshe Rabbeinu had, that we still subscribe to today on some level? This was brought by Yisro, by a non-Jew. It influenced our society. Our whole encampment was set up, and it's not about saying that secularism is inherently bad. It's about being able to use our mind to think things through, and to use our free will to understand that we're influenced by what's around us, and in whatever way that we can achieve an influence which is positive, that's what we need to strive to achieve. Okay, any questions here? I guess, I don't know if anybody has any questions, anybody wants to ask any questions. I've been talking straight for a while. I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of out of practice when it comes to Zoom a little bit. I've been doing a lot of YouTube and other kinds of classes. It's been a while, but this is the end of part one. I think that we need to infuse within our homes a sense of dveikus, and I'm certainly speaking for myself when I say that this is a challenge. And it's not that there's something inherently wrong with secularism. It's that we need to decide for ourselves what we would like to be influenced by. And if we can have this enriching Torah perspective be the infusion within our homes, then, because what I'm suggesting and what we're talking about here tonight is not to say, oh, I don't want to be influenced by anything. Look, at the end of the day, we're all going to be influenced by something, but it's not a zero-sum game, and we can really do the best that we can. It's not all or nothing, but we can really do the best that we can to say that we can choose for ourselves who influences us and what influences us, and not that we just won't be influenced, because I think that that is a very short-sighted way of looking at how the Almighty, the Creator, made a human being. Okay.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. Very,
Yeah.
very interesting. So I have a question in regards to expounding on the issue of, that we shouldn't say secular is bad, but when it comes to when, I agree, and when it comes to kids in school having, a separation between Judaic studies and Jewish studies.
Yeah.
And then, by creating that system, it's like, okay, now there's secular, and then there's Jewish studies. But how do you bridge the gap in helping to your children understand that, yes, math is important, social studies is important, and how do you bridge it with Torah thinking and why it's important? Like, what would you say to them?
I mean, I think if I could synthesize your question, you're saying, what do we tell our children about math and science? First of all, math is not secular. Math is all over the Gemara and all over the Torah, Same thing with science. I mean, we encounter science and we encounter the creator. Um, but I will say it's a very fine line. And when we teach our children about these other subjects, we need them to understand it within the context of Torah. The Almighty created the world. We want to learn about the world because it was created by the Almighty. And we use science to best appreciate Hashem. So that's with regard specifically to that question. But save the other questions. I want to start part 2. Write down your questions if you can, or put them in the chat box if you want as well. It's very important today, especially during this pandemic, and I would say even for Emma, even for a six-month-old child, that a parent is able to get over whatever reservations they might have. And I know from a mentor of mine, he thought it was very important today, and to have a strategy of teaching children how to play. Play is very important, and they should be able to play with you. And to get on your knees, get down on the floor, and whatever games they're playing, to be with them. And it shouldn't just all be serious kind of disciplinarian kind of parenting. But today in the 21st century, especially when you have so many tablets and screens and children don't know how to play because they don't use toys as much, teaching them how to use toys and using the toys with them is really very important. So Rashi, the first Rashi in Parshas Emor, picks up on the fact that it says the word Emor, which is the name of the Parsha, and it says Va'amarta. And if you look at the first pasuk in Parshas Emor, let's see if I have it here for you. You'll see it's very strange. Here it says, Vayomer Adonai Moshe Amor Kohanim b'nei Aaron v'amarta aleim l'nefesh lo yitzama v'yamav. Okay, so the specific context is talking about Kahuna, the Kohen, but this double language is talking about how a Kohen parent is supposed to instruct a Kohen child. And that's the context. So there's an insight here into parenting. And we're told that the double language tells you sometimes you need to repeat things, which means we need to be patient. Patience is very, very difficult when it comes to parenting. And hopefully we can kind of remind ourselves of that, of the importance of that, because it's very hard to come by. Patience can be in short supply sometimes. Person needs to be consistent, and they need to have integrity. And here we see that when Rashi says that the Kohen adult is warned about the Kohen children, what he's being told is that the Kohen child, the commentary is, Kohen child is watching the Kohen adult. And so if they see the adult is inconsistent, is duplicitous, or doesn't have the scruples, he says one thing, but he does another. So then that's when a child will be negatively impacted by parents. The stakes are very high. And of course, we do the best that we can. We might mess up and make mistakes sometimes. But we, of course, have to realize that we influence our children by our own actions. I'm going to share with you a quote, a secular quote. How about that? A secular quote from a non-Jewish person. And we're going to learn from his wisdom. I think it's a very wise quote. Quote is from a author, 20th century author, where Peter de Vries, he says, the value of marriage, listen carefully, the value of marriage isn't that adults produce children, but that children produce adults. Again, the value of marriage isn't that adults produce children, but that children produce adults, which means that we might act however we want to act, but when we have a child, it's altogether very different. It's very different. And we need to be more responsible when we bring a child into the world, and that's what raises the stakes. So really, during the pandemic, the child was around the is around the adult many more hours during the course of the day. So if that's the case, it becomes all that more challenging. As parents, we need to hang together as best as we can, because it can be most difficult. Now, I want to share with you another comment that I think is relevant for parenting. The Rabbeinu Bachya says that there were 70 elders, that 70 leaders among the Jewish people in the Midbar. And he says, you see, again with Yisro, but even when Moshe was lobbying Paro for freedom, for emancipation for the Jewish people, these 70 elders, they play a very important role. And Rabbeinu Bachya says is that, look, Moshe he was very lofty. It was hard to relate to. And the 70 elders played a role in helping to connect to the masses. And sometimes we need to realize that it can't be all such a lofty level, that we need to make sure that we can relate to our child and that our child can relate to us. So much so, we're told that the elders, they realized that some of the actions of Moshe were going to lead to increased punishment, to increase the anger and the vitriol and the damage that the slave masters would have upon the Jewish people. And they themselves, we're told, took the lashes of the slave masters whipping the Jews. They themselves took those blows. And sometimes when you're in a position when you're trying to connect people, in this case it was the masses, but children as well, to something higher, to something more. So you need to be able to sacrifice accordingly. Look, we've gone almost 40 minutes talking about this, and we haven't mentioned the most famous line in the Torah about education, and that is from Mishlei, where it says "Chanoch lenar al pi darko." So you have to raise a child in the way that he has his nature, or she has her nature. And Shlomo HaMelech was the wisest person who ever lived, and he told us in Mishlei that this is the case, and that all people have a nature to them, and it's up to us. We decided, in a sense, to bring this child into the world, or to try to pass down the Torah to the next generation. It's up to us to understand the nature of this child, how they tick, who they are, what they do. So every child is different. They have their own areas of expertise. We can't just have a vision of what the child should become, and this is very hard, I can say from personal experience. So speaking to Shirley and Ricky here about you have a vision what you want the child to become, but that you learn over the course of time what the nature is of the child, what the capabilities of the child. And of course, all children are equal in terms of their value, but they all manifest their skills differently. So that is kind of a basic Torah principle when it comes to education, is to learn who your child is, learn their nature, and then educate them in the way that's best for them. So lastly, when it comes to Chanukah, we talk about that the Chanukah observance is the candle, and the candle is Ner Ishu Beso. It's the house. It's the domestic focus that we need to have. It's about what our house is like and what our family is like. And so we when we light the candle, we think of the fact that we want the Torah, which is compared to a flame, to be part of the definition of our home. And to a great extent, Hanukkah is about that. It's about influencing others, Persume Nisa, but doing so with it, knowing who we are on an internal focus. And that is very important for raising the next generation of Jews.